Hey guys, welcome to my winning with nothing video. Um, this video is going to be 20 hands that I've picked out from my poker checker database that I thought were interesting and can show you how to more effectively win when you miss the flop and not always just give up on pots when you miss. One word of caution though is that you don't want to just go out and start doing this all the time and just bluffing all the time and winning, trying to win pots with nothing a lot, because your opponents will pick up on that and will be more willing to call you down later. So with that being said, there are very good spots to win the pot when you don't hit the flop, and that's what you want to look for, and hopefully this video will make you better at that. So this first hand is just a pretty basic example. I have ace 10, we're 5-handed, and I make a standard raise and get called by the big blind, and flop comes jack high, pretty dry board, a real good board to c-bet, and that's one of the big things that will help you with winning pots with nothing is recognizing good boards to c-bet and bad boards to c-bet. And since this is a dry flop, it's very likely to miss my opponent, and he checks to me, and I just make a c-bet here for 600 into the pot of 1,000, and he folds and I take it down. So pretty simple, but the important thing is it's a real good board to c-bet, and you know, as a pre-flop raiser here, you should be c-betting pretty much all the time on this board here. Okay, I've picked out a wide range of hands as well. As far as we're going to cover check raising with nothing, we're going to cover floating, donk betting, how to defend against those things when your opponents do it when you have nothing, and so a lot of different hands. So they're not in any particular order. I'm just going to continue going through them, and since we do have 20 of them, I'm going to go relatively quickly. Here we're heads up, and we're pretty deep stacked for a heads up for in a sit and go. So I have 8-10 here offsuit. I raise it up, and player calls in the big blind, and we get a good flop for me to make a c-bet here. Ace high, dry board. This opponent's not going to flat call with too many aces in his range, and that's another important concept for you to understand, is knowing what your opponent's range is going to be for being able to bluff with nothing and successfully take the pot down. You know, most players when they're playing heads up here are going to re-raise pre-flop with ace king, ace queen, ace jack, ace 10. You know, and some players are going to even fold hands like ace 2, ace 3, ace 4, ace 7 offsuit. You know, sometimes they'll call with them, but so there's not very many aces in his range, and I have all aces in my range, ace 2 to ace king, and so I can rep this board better than he can, and so I make a c-bet, and he flat calls me here. So it is possible he has a weak ace here, but I think it's more likely he has a 9 or a 5, and against a 9 or a 5, another overcard comes on the turn to that, and if he does have a weak ace, he may just give it up here as well. So he checks again, and I continue with the aggression, betting 6,000 into the 9,000 pot, because I know his range is weak. You know, it's possible he could be slow playing a big hand here like pocket fives, maybe ace 5 or ace 9, but those hands are a very small part of his range. It's just combinatorically not possible for him for those hands to be a big part of his range here. So I continue, and he folds, and I take it down. Okay, next hand. Early in a tournament, we have a limper in middle position, and I have ace queen suited on the button here, so I make an isolation raise to 80 to try and get a heads up against this player in position with the best hand, and he calls, and again, it's a really good board to c-bet because it's a dry king high flop, and I'm gonna have more kings in my range than he will, so it's not necessarily more kings, but better kings like ace king and king queen, where he's limp calling with hands like king jack, king 10, king 9. king 4 suited, stuff like that. And he's just going to miss this flop a lot as well with all of his suited connectors and even small pocket pairs if I can get to fold to 2 or 3 barrels if necessary. He checks, and so I make a continuation bet here, 120 into the pot of 190, and he flat calls me. So his range to me at this point is maybe a weak king or a pocket pair like pocket 5s or pocket 7s, maybe a hand like ace 3 and possibly ace 2 as well. But since the 2 is paired, that's less likely. He checks again, and so I think his range is pretty weak here, given the hands I just went over. So I'm going to continue, or excuse me, I did check back here, because after he does call, he does have you know, a lot of hands that are going to call a bet here, and this isn't a good card to bluff on the turn. Whenever the board pairs the second or third card, it's generally perceived as not a very good card to bluff at, because they are calling with a deuce some of the time there, and it doesn't really change anything on the board. Like if a you know, if I didn't have ace queen and an ace came, let's say I just had like 8-7 suited and an ace came, that would be a very good card for me to bluff here, because it puts more pressure on his weaker range, his pocket 5s or his king 9, that he, you know, it's more likely to get him to fold. So I do check here, and I end up making a queen on the river. So this is a good spot to bluff catch. He makes a small bet here. There's really no reason for me to put in a raise if he does have king 9 or if he happens to have ace 2. So in this spot I think it's best just to go ahead and call, and he ends up having 4 or 5. So he had an open end straight draw that he turned into a bluff on the river. I did give him a free card on the turn here, but given the fact that I think his range was a king or a pocket pair, I'm not going to get him to fold when the deuce comes there very often. So you gotta temper, you gotta tone down the aggression sometimes when it's not the right spot to do it. And you know, in this spot I caught a queen on the river, and if the river would have been another 2, I may have called here with ace high, maybe 10 to 20% of the time, but majority of the time I'm just going to fold because I'm going to give him credit for a king or a pocket pair there. But somewhat of an interesting hand, and let's move on to the next one. Okay, here I'm playing heads up sit and go against Croy Dog, who's one of the best heads up sit and go players out there. So not real good game selection, but nonetheless we have our hand here, and he min raises the button, and I have 9-3 suited. And you know, looking at these hands in a vacuum sometimes isn't you know, it doesn't really account for the game flow of the match, or you know, what was going on at the time at the table. So it's sometimes tough to just pull these hands out and look at them independently without knowing the history behind, you know, what's happened up to this point. But you know, at this point I decided to go ahead and go for a 3-bet here. And you know, it's not a hand I would 3-bet very often here, but occasionally mixing up and doing it is okay. I think the best play is just to go ahead and fold here pre-flop, but this time I elected to go for a 3-bet. And since I'm out of position, I make it slightly over 3x, and he flat calls, and we get a really good flop for me to represent, because he's not going to flat call with ace king or ace queen. He's going to go ahead and jam pre-flop aces, kings, you know. So again, this is a good flop for me to take a stab at. So I bet you know, a little bit over half pot, 240, leaving myself 535 left. And in these heads up sit and goes, you know, it's sometimes you can get very short stacked, and still you still have room to maneuver post flop, compared to like when you get it to the end of a 9-player or 18-player sit and go. Usually it's just shove or fold. So he flat calls here, and you know, it's a really weird spot, because you know, I think he's mostly flat calling with a weak ace or a weak king. I think a flush draw, he may just go ahead and jam in to get some fold equity out of it in case I have a hand like Queen Jack or even pocket tens. I might fold here if he jams on the flop. So I'm not too concerned about a flush draw, and so again I think he has a weak hand here that I may be able to get off if I go ahead and two barrel this, and I do shove it all in and go for the suicide bluff here, and he ends up folding and I take down the pot. Okay, this hand is interesting as well, as far as we go for from a bluff to value betting. So here I'm in raise and get flat called heads up again and again a dry jack high flop, so I'm just gonna c bet here, and he flat calls me. So again, you know, he's most likely gonna have a weak pair here again. So when I hit my queen on the turn, this is an overcard, and it's a card that I would bluff some of the time if I didn't have anything here. So if I'm going to bluff it when I don't have anything, I should go ahead and bet it when I do hit the queen, and I can definitely get value from a jack and a 6 if he has a hand like ace 6 or pocket 8s, ace 3, hands like that. And if he was just randomly floating me with a hand like 9-10 or king 10, he now has a lot of outs against me as well. So I definitely should continue barreling here because I did hit my hand, and I think I have him beat most of the time here. And the point is, if you're gonna bluff a card that in a spot like this, you should go ahead and bet it when you do make your hand as well. So when you do c-bet the flop like this with ace king and the ace comes on the turn, you should go ahead and keep betting, because you should be betting the ace when you don't have anything a lot of the time there to try and take it down. So when you do hit your hand, just go ahead and keep going with it. So I bet 80 here and he flat calls, and the river again is not too much of a worry to me. So I think I have the best hand here and go for a value bet, and I bet pretty big because I want it to look like a bluff to him, almost full pot, and he ends up hero calling me with a 3 with ace 3 there. So you know, interesting hand as far as you can be bluffing and hit your hand, and you should still continue betting, I think, in those spots. Okay guys, this hand, it folds around to me and I have ace 4, so I min raise it on the button and get called by the big blind. Pretty common situation that comes up. And again, king high flop, it's a little wetter with the flush draw and straight draws out there, but it's still a good flop to bet. So I go ahead and bet it and my opponent flat calls. So when he flat calls, again, his range is going to be something like a king and some draws, maybe an 8 or a 7. So overall that range is pretty weak. If he has a set of 7s or a set of 8s on this board, I think he's going to either lead out with them or check raise because of the draws that are out there. So I'm discounting that potential a lot, because most people are going to check raise or just donk bet out with those hands. So his range looks pretty weak to me again. So the deuce isn't a real great card to barrel here, but I would bet this again if I did have the king, because I would protect my hand against the draws, and he is going to have a lot of draws here, as well as you know, if he has something like ace 8, I want to protect if I have like king queen here against the ace coming. So you know, the deuce isn't great to barrel here, but if I did have the king, I would continue. So I do continue here, and he calls again. So you know, his hand is looking more like a draw to me. I think he folds out if he has a hand like 8-9 or 7-6. I think he folds it out here. So his range is looking more like a draw or a king that is getting stubborn. The flush draw gets there on the end. If it would have been a diamond, I wouldn't be concerned about it at all. Because he flat called me on the flop, it's most likely he has a spade draw. He could have a hand like 9-10 or 9-6 as well, or even 5-6 for an open ender that missed. But he ends up checking to me on the river. So when he checks here, I don't think this is a good spot to bet, because if he does have a misdraw, you know, ace high might be good. Here I do have some showdown equity, and if you know, he could very well check a flush here, which is going to be the most common draw I think he has after calling here twice. So I think it's best just to check it back and show it down. I do check it, and he ends up having 6-9 of diamonds. So he had an open ender, turned a flush draw, and missed on the river, and I end up winning with ace high. Okay, guys, and once again, you know, I'm showing a lot of hands that I win here, but the name of the video is winning with nothing, so I'm showing you guys hands where I win, and you know, it's hopefully going to help you win more pots when you are in similar situations as well. So here we're three-handed in the sit and go, and we have a regular rat sauce min raise on the button here, 7-5 offsuit. You know, I'm not going to defend this too often here, but this time I do make the call because we are deeper stacked for the end game of a sit and go. So if I do flop a hand, I can win his entire stack a lot of the time. This flop, you know, it's not great for me. I do have a gut shot, but it's the type of flop where a regular is going to c-bet it like 100% of the time, and I'm going to have to bluff some of the time here in order to make my call pre-flop profitable. And this is one of those times where he does c-bet and I do bluff. I end up check raising all in. The reason being is that if he bets almost 1,000 here, if I make it like 2,500 or 3,000 check raise, I'm pretty much committed anyways, and I don't want to give him the notion that I might fold to a re-raise here on the flop. So I would rather just maximize my fold equity here. He's going to fold out all the times when he has nothing. He might even fold a hand like ace-4 or ace-8. Ace-8, he's probably calling with ace-8, but if he has a hand like 8-9, he may fold, and even a hand like pocket 5s, pocket 6s. So I'm getting better hands than me to fold, and I'm also getting me to fold all his bluffs, and when called I am going to have a little bit of equity with my gut shot, and maybe like a backdoor 2-pair draw or something, whatever. But you know, when he calls me here, it's not going to be good for me in equity. But I think I'm getting so many folds, it's going to be profitable. I wouldn't recommend doing this all the time because your opponents will make adjustments. But you know, if you have a tight image, you can get away with stuff like this once in a while. And he does fold, and I take it down. Okay, guys, so this hand, you can see I'm out of position here in the big blind. We have a min raise from late position, and with 7-9 suited, I make the call for one more big blind and get a pretty good flop for my hand with the flush draw. And I do have backdoor straight potential with this as well. I check, and my opponent is going to fire this board pretty much every time. I think the ace high board here with c-bet, and he c-bets pretty small, so it doesn't look like to me he has an ace here very often, because if he has an ace, he's going to probably bet a little bit bigger to protect his hand. So what I elect to do in this situation, I could check raise here, but check raising, I think in this spot it's a little more like threatening to your opponent, so they're more likely to play back at you or make a call here with an 8 or maybe pocket 9s, and I really don't want that to happen. So what I like to do is just check call the flop here, and the board, the turn comes another 8. So with the 8 coming, it's definitely in my range for check calling here, and I think my opponent probably is not going to have very much here a lot of the time. I want to get to the river cheaply, and I want to fold out all of his bluffs, and I want to take this pot down when he has nothing, and when he does have something, I want to see the river to hopefully make my flush. But I can also rep that I have an 8 in my hand, and you know, see what comes on the river, and may be able to bluff him out on the river if he does call as well. So in this spot, I make a real small bet, only about 40% of the pot, but it's the type of bet that looks scary because I would do it with an 8, and with an ace I could do this as well. And you know, I'm just going to get him to fold all of his garbage here, and he does end up folding, and I take it down. You know, it kind of puts you in a tough spot. If he calls there and you miss your flush, you pretty much I think have to give up on most river cards. But you know, that didn't happen, so I ended up taking this one down. Alright, continuing on with the action. Min raise on the button here. We are pretty shallow stacked as far as effective stacks. My opponent only has about 10 big blinds, so you know, this isn't going to be a real great call here, but I did make it this time. Most of the time I would just fold the 9-6 offsuit here, but you know, and again, I don't have the stats on this player, but if he's a weaker player, probably might be the reason why I called here. Again, you know, this board, he's going to see bet most of the time on this board, and he's not going to have anything the majority of the time. So, you know, for me to call with his hand here, I'm going to have to bluff sometimes, as I've already mentioned, to make this profitable. And, you know, when he min bets here, it's just, it looks really weak to me. I don't think he's going to min bet a queen here because he would want to protect against the flush draw. It really looks to me like he has nothing and he just wants to make a small stab attempt to try and take the pot down. So I like to go for a stone cold bluff raise. I really don't have much equity if I'm called here. You know, I'm going to need like runner to win the hand most likely. So this is again a play that I wouldn't do very often, and you know, you really have to pick your spots carefully when you make a play like this. So don't just go run out there and start making plays like this all the time, but if you find the right spots like this, they can be profitable. So I put them all in, and he ends up folding, and I take down the pot, and it's pretty significant pots, over 7,000 chips. So it's nice to pick those up in the later and middle stages of sit and goes. Alright, next hand. Early stages of the sit and go. This time I have Jack 9 suited and raise it up. Get 2 callers, and we see an ace high flop, and I get donk bet into from the player in the big blind. So he donk bets pretty small here, 80 chips, and you know, I'm assuming that he is probably a donk. I could be wrong because I don't have his stats, but you know, for him to make this small of a bet into an ace high board like this, is just it's not going to work very often. The only thing I would be scared of here is pocket 4s or pocket 5s, and he's just not going to have that very often. So I think it's going to be massively profitable to go ahead and raise here, represent a big ace like ace king, ace queen, even pocket aces. You know, I think I can generate a lot of fold equity here with a raise. So I raise it up to 260. You don't want to make it too big when you're doing plays like this, because you're just making the price on your bluff more, and over the long run that'll cost you. And also it looks bluffier to your opponents, like if you make a 400 raise here, or you know, just a ridiculous amount. It's just not necessary. You can keep your bluffs pretty small in relation to the size of the pot and still be effective. So they both end up folding, and I take it down. Okay, so next hand, ace king suited is a very strong hand. I raise it up from early position, and we get called in 2 spots. Again, this board is a lot wetter, a lot of draws out there, and I do have a gut shot to the nuts, assuming it's not a spade of the jack of spades that comes out. And again, we get donk bet into small here, when players do this, you know, on this type of board, it's generally going to be a draw, I found, because they want to see the turn cheaply and you know, give themselves a good price on their draw. And sometimes they'll have a weak queen here occasionally too. So what's the best play here? I think you know, if you just call here, your hand looks really weak, because you wouldn't just call here if you had a big hand. Like if you had a set of tens here, you're definitely raising to protect your hand. If you have ace queen here, you're probably raising. So you know, I want to represent a stronger hand, so I go ahead and raise here, 3 times the size of his bet, and it's still, you know, a good amount in relation to the size of the pot. And I get one player to fold, and player in the small blind calls, and the turn is an ace. And you know, I mentioned on a previous hand in this video that it's good to go ahead and bet your hand when you make it, and he checks to me. But you know, there's exceptions to everything, and I think there's the exception on this hand is that a lot of his draws are going to be king jack. You know, it's the only real open-ender that you know, I would be concerned about. He's not going to donk bet and call here with 8-7 very often, or maybe queen jack, or excuse me, not queen jack, king jack is pretty much the only thing that I would be worried about. So he's going to have that here some of the time. The spade draw is more likely than king jack, but you know, betting here, if I get check raised, it puts me in a really difficult spot, and I do have showdown value now, so I just check it back this time. And the river's another ace, so now it's very likely I'm pretty sure I have the best hand, assuming he doesn't have king jack. And when he checks the river, I know he doesn't have king jack here, so I go for a value bet, 360 into the 560, and he ends up folding. Alright, next hand. This is a pretty sick hand. Again, you know, caution, you don't want to make these plays that I make in this hand too often, but again, with the right image, you can do it occasionally. So player limps in this small blind. You know, I'm assuming again probably a weaker player, and I have a pretty garbage hand that's not going to win too often, although I do have position on him and could probably take the pot away from him a lot post-flop. I like to raise and just try to take it pre-flop from him, and he makes the call and gets stubborn. So we see a king high flop, again dry board, and I do have a gut shot with a 4 as well, but definitely a board I have to c-bet here, and I c-bet 1800, and he check raises me to 4,000. It's a scary looking check raise because it's kind of small, but it is a size that I think looks like he might fold to a shove. And this player can't really represent strong kings like ace king. He's not going to play this way. King queen, he's not going to play pocket aces or pocket kings like this. So you know, he can't really represent too strong of hands on this board, except for maybe pocket 7s and pocket 5s, and those are, again, just combinatorically, those don't come around too often. So you know, it's a spot where I think I can take it away with a bluff 3-bet here. And again, I wouldn't make this play too often, but in this spot I think it was right, and I did go for it and did get him to fold. Just it's a spot where the board comes out, you know, perfect for me to represent ace king, you know, pocket aces, king queen. It's just I have a lot stronger kings and bigger pairs in my range with how I played my hand versus how he played his hand. Okay, next hand. In this hand, I think shows an important concept as well. Okay, so let's look at this though first. We have a min raise in the small blind, and I call here with 4-9. You know, it's not a great hand, but you know, if you've played any limit hold'em, Generally, if the small blind min raises you, you pretty much have odds to call with any 2 cards in the big blind. Just as kind of a general rule of thumb. So I call here, and that's if you're deeper stacked as well, not being shallow stacked. And we are deep stacked here. And my opponent c-bets this flop. You know, he's not going to have very much on this flop very often. You know, just in hold'em in general, just people don't make hands very often. And you know, I do have a weak draw here, and it's kind of a spot like where I want to keep the pot small and draw to my hand, but I also want to get him to fold if he has nothing. And I think, you know, I could definitely raise here, but I think the best play is just a flat call to keep the pot small, and if he checks to me on the turn, I can take it away from him a lot of times. So I'm basically floating him here, and the turn's not real good for my hand, although I do pick up a gut shot with an 8, and he checks to me. So again, this is a spot where I think he's gonna have nothing most of the time, and as a general rule, you don't want to draw against players who have nothing, because if you do make your hand, they're not going to pay you off. You want to draw against players who you think do have something, so that you will get paid off if you make your hand. So this is a good spot to go ahead and make a bluff at him to try and take the pot away if he has nothing here. And you know, it is possible he could check raise me here and I don't get to see my the river card, but after checking on this board on the turn here, I think he's just going to fold so often that a bet is definitely the best play. And he does fold, and I take it down. Okay, again, another kind of a basic hand here. King Queen here. You know, sometimes you could 3-bet this in the blinds, but I like to just flat call here. And 2-4-5, you know, is a flop that I can definitely represent here. And this player's a regular in the games, and I think he likes to c-bet a lot. So he's gonna, you know, a lot of players in sit and goes just monkey c-bet. If you keep the stats on your HUD of c-bet percentage, some of them are up around 90, you know, 100. Not too many are at 100% over a large sample, but there are some regulars that I know that are in the 90s, and that's just, in my opinion, c-betting way too often. And you know, it's definitely a hole in their game that can be exploited. So he does c-bet here, 80 chips, and you know, the best play here, I think, is to go ahead and do a float. You know, sometimes I would raise here, but on this type of board, the only thing that I can credibly represent if I raise is a set and maybe ace-3. And you know, since he's a regular, he knows those aren't going to come around too often, so he might be more likely to play back at me. So I just want to call here and you know, kind of just take it away from him if he checks the turn. And I do have overs as well. Whenever you're making plays like this, you always want to have a little bit of equity as a you know, a backup plan. Or if you hit a king or a queen, you could get value from a hand if he has like pocket tens or pocket jacks. So it's nice to have some equity. So I do call here, and the turn is a 2, so it's, you know, kind of just see what he does, and he does check. So I think that gives me the green light to take the pot away. And I do go ahead and bet, and he folds. Okay, moving to heads up now on this. 5-7 suited on the button. I go ahead and min raise it and get flat called from the my opponent. And on this board I have a gut shot, and my opponent checks to me. So it's not a real good board to c-bet in general, as the you know, kind of your perceived image of, you know, having bigger cards since you raised. But obviously we are raising hands like this, so we can represent this board. And so I do go ahead and c-bet it, just trying to take the pot down. And my opponent check raises me, and he does so for a pretty small amount. And you know, this is one way you can combat a player who loves to check raise, is to just go ahead and 3-bet them. You know, in spots where you think it's likely they're bluffing. Some players, again, if you keep on your HUD the check raise percentage, players who are check raising over 20%, I would say 20-25%, are doing it as a bluff quite often. So when you are up against players like that, you need to be aware of it and you know, counteract what they're doing, so that you can not always have to fold to their check raises and give them lots of respect, because they're doing it as a bluff a lot. So I rebluff here and shove them all in, and he folds and I take it down. Again, it's nice to have some equity here with my gut shot to a 6, and you know, backdoor as well. If it comes a 3 and an ace, I probably will make the best hand with a 5 high straight. But you know, it's not a play I make a lot, but against the right players who love to check raise, it's something that's necessary to combat their strategy. Okay, next hand. We have a raise in middle position, and I flat call here with ace-8 suited on the button, sort of deep stacked, and big blind calls as well. So we see a flop, 9 high dry board. It checks to the pre-flop raiser, and he c-bets 250 into 400. So it looks pretty standard. You know, he's going to have pocket pairs in his range. He's also going to have a lot of bluffs with his ace high and king high and queen high hands. So this is a spot where I can represent pocket pairs, sets, and slow played over pairs. Again, I could float here, and that's a fine option. I could, you know, there's nothing wrong with just folding here either. You know, most of the time it probably is the best play just to fold in spots like this, especially with a player left to act in the big blind. But this particular instance, especially if you're up against somebody who just has a very high c-bet percentage, you can go ahead and bluff raise the flop occasionally. That's another way to combat their c-betting strategy. You can float, and you can check raise, and you can bluff raise the flop as well in position. So that's what I do here. I make it 600. And it's, again, not necessary to make a real big raise here. You can see it's you know, it's a little bit over 2 times the size of his bet, and that's in case this guy does wake up with a hand, the player in the big blind, and shoves over it. I've left myself enough room to fold here, but it also looks really strong, like I have a set and want action. So you know, that's what I want it to look like, and they both do fold, and I take it down. Okay, guys, next hand, you can see I have ace-king, 4-handed, and it folds around to me, so I make a standard raise here against the big blind, and he flat calls. And we see a flop. I flop a gut shot with if a deuce were to come. However, it's not a real great gut shot, because if he has a 6, he makes a better straight. But it's a spot where with the stack sizes, there's 300 in the pot, and he's only got 1,000 left. So if I c-bet here, he's gonna jam over me with all kinds of hands. You know, ace high hands himself. You know, pocket 8s, pocket 7s, pocket 6s, ace 5, ace 4. There's all kinds of stuff that he's just gonna jam. He may even jam as a bluff with hands like king queen, king jack. And it's not a spot that I love calling it off. I would much rather be the player who has fold equity. So I check here with the intention of going for a check raise to get him to fold, to generate some fold equity. And he does go ahead and bet. Again, this is a spot though where I could be giving a free card to a hand like Jack 10, and he hits a 10 on the turn. But it's the risk I'm willing to take to be able to generate fold equity here. And I check raise it all in, and he does end up folding. So if I would have played this hand differently, where I c-bet and he jams Jack 10, Jack 10's not really a hand that I want to get it all in here, even though I'm ahead of it. You know, he's still got 2 live cards, and you know, he has better equity than I would like him to have. So I'd rather switch it up. So it's important to pay attention to the stack sizes when deciding how you want to play your hand. The stack sizes were very important in this hand. I went for the check raise instead of c-betting it myself because of my opponent's small stack size there. Okay, again, deeper stack. Actually, I think this hand comes from Sunday Million, probably, because everyone's starting with 10,000 chips. But I have King Jack here in the small blind, and deeper stacked, I want to see a lot of flops against players early in the tournament, because I think I have a pretty big edge on most of them. So we see this flop, and you know, it's very coordinated. It definitely is a flop that would hit a small blind's calling range. And it doesn't hit pre-flop raisers range too often, depending on their stats. Obviously, if they're looser, then it will, but tight players not going to hit this flop too often. So he c-bets, a little over half pot. One player folds, and it's back to me. And again, this is a spot where I have overcards. I can represent this flop better than he can, and you know, I think I'm just going to get him to fold out. Definitely get him to fold out better hands like ace high, and maybe even king queen would fold here. Actually, I'm pretty sure king queen would fold here if I check raise most of the time. So I'm getting some better hands to fold, and if he does decide to call, I do have 2 overcards, which is nice. I'd much rather make this play here with King Jack than say like pocket 2s, because pocket 2s only has 2 outs, where King Jack has 6 outs. So it's a little better with this hand, I think. And I do make the check raise to 650. I want to make it look like I want to protect against draws, slightly over 3x, and you know, I would make this play with a set, you know, the nut flush draw and straights, obviously. And he folds, and I take it down. Okay, we're down to the final 2 hands left in the video, so thanks for hanging in there with me, guys. Hopefully it's been helpful so far. Here we have King 9, 3-handed, min raise from the small blind, so I'm going to defend with his hand and just flat call. We get again a queen high dry board, so I would expect him to c-bet almost his entire range on this board. So if he's c-betting almost his entire range on this board, it means it's going to be a bluff most of the time. So he does bet, and since it is going to be a bluff most of the time, it's going to make a raise profitable. So I raise, and he folds, and I take it away from him. So again, bluff raising the flop on certain boards that you expect your opponent to c-bet with his entire range is going to be profitable, because they're just not going to have anything most of the time. Okay, final hand. Alright, 3-handed again, and we get a min raise again, so I'm calling here with 6-7 to see a flop in position. And my opponent, again, a queen high board, he's gonna fire a huge percentage of the time here. So this time though, since there's a flush draw on board, I elect to go for the float instead of the bluff raise, because he is gonna have a flush draw himself some of the time, and if I raise here, he's just gonna jam it over me. But by floating here, I can take it away from him on the turn, and I do have a gut shot as well. And my 6 and 7 might even be clean pair outs as well if he has a hand like ace 5 or ace 3. You know, obviously I win if I hit a 7. So I just flat call here, and the turn is a deuce, and he checks. So, you know, I am kind of drawing here to a gut shot and maybe good pair outs, but I don't want to be drawing against just a complete bluff. So again, the best play here is to go ahead and bet this turn and try and take it away from him. And again, it doesn't have to be a big bet, slightly over half pot, and he does fold, and we take it down. So that concludes the video. I hope you guys enjoyed it, and hopefully it helps you find better spots to bluff in and win with nothing. Good luck at the tables.